Hello, I'm Nina NAVAJAS. In this presentation titled Fatphobia is also a social work issue, I'd like to discuss with you why I consider fatphobia needs to be addressed from our profession and its relation to neoliberalism, social discrimination, inequalities, and oppression. I've structured my presentation into 4 parts. Firstly, we'll explore the meaning of fat in neoliberal societies. In the second part, we'll deconstruct some fat myths. Then we'll move on to see why fatphobia is a health hazard. And in the last part, I'll try to convince you why fatphobia is a social work issue. Based on this presentation, as an end note, I'll try to collect some final conclusions. So let's move on now to the first part and explore the means of fighting neoliberal societies. As we know, according to the World Health Organization, obesity has reached the status of an epidemic in the new millennium. Against this backdrop, public health agencies of national and international organizations in industrialized countries have put in place a set of batteries and policies to combat it. This in turn has led to the demonization of fatness and fat people and the blaming for destroying the public health systems, since fat is considered as an individual choice or as the incompetence of the individual in governing himself. The statements made by these agents and its alarmist tone have been critically questioned, affirming that the obesity epidemic discourse has been constructed as a moral panic. So to understand the obesity epidemic discourse, we must read it in its place of enunciation, that is, a context characterized by the rise of neoliberal policies that thrive in all areas, not just in the economy. In order to establish the business logic in the entire social layer, neoliberal rationality has made various adjustments that haven't escaped the control of the body. Therefore, the mainstream biomedical discourse emphasizes self-responsibility and self-control in order to regulate bodily behaviors to maintain the health of the nation, in a scenario where the remaining health institutions inherited from the welfare state are being slowly reconfigured through the gradual privatization of health. Thus, the concept of sickness slightly moves away from its social dimension, and health is considered more and more as an individual issue that must be guarded by the subject himself. Since the new public health discourse are based on the neoliberal logic of individual risk management, the refusal of adopting healthy lifestyles is considered as a moral failure of the subject's ability in governing himself, in a context where everyone is a potential entrepreneur. Since fat is considered risky for health, some professionals working in the health field, social workers included, consider they should avoid fat in the patients. Let's move on now to the second slide and try to deconstruct some fat myths. The idea that the fat body might be transformed easily through diet and exercise has become an incontestable truth. This hides that not everyone has the same opportunities for developing the lifestyles that are universally considered valuable and potentially attainable by all. Because as we know, the development of this is subordinate to the differential position that each individual has in the social space. The 2007 economic crisis has left behind high unemployment rates, wage cuts, high poverty rates, and the freezing of pension, amongst others. So as social workers, in this context, we should ask ourselves what kind of good choices can be made when some don't even have the choice to make any choices at all. The health field and the public opinion also consider fat a result of overeating. So in tune with this, the discourse that refers to the fat body alludes to unwillingness, sickness, and moral failure. Thus, in this context, dieting and losing weight symbolizes the victory of reason, will, and morals over nature. But the reality is much more complex. We know the effects of fat on health have been exaggerated, and weight is influenced by multiple factors. Fat is not always correlated to ill health, and even moderate obesity can protect against disease. It must be said that weight cycling and fatness are correlated with weight loss diets, and people who weight cycle are at a greater risk of developing chronic and coronary disease. And also, people with a history or that are subjected to periods of food deprivation and strict dietary requirements might develop future eating disorders. So since there isn't conclusive scientific evidence that on the causes of fatness, recent research discourages weight loss diets because their effects can increase health risks. Let's move on to the next slide and now try to explore why fat phobia is a health hazard. Drawing on the notion stigma, I discuss why fat phobia is hazardous for fat people's health. The fat body is a socially discredited body, marked by difference, considered ugly, sedentary, and repulsive. Also constructed as an expensive body because it supposedly consumes more medical services than the rest of the population due to the abandonment of its owner. Only in the USA, discrimination and prejudices against fat people have increased 66% in the last 10 years. This translates into inequalities such as access to employment, promotion and job continuity, education, clothing, mobility, and medical treatment. Research has also revealed biases from the patients of doctors, since less time is dedicated to their attention, and fat people they prescribe with more tests and medicines related to fat stereotypes, such as antidepressants or cholesterol analytics. This exemplifies a neoliberal tendency where some social issues such as fat phobia are projected into psychology, making individuals exclusively responsible for their situation. Publicity also reinforces the idea that fat is despicable, and weight control is an individual ability, which is the source of stigmatizing attitudes towards fat people. To our dismay, also fat people internalize and reproduce these fatphobic attitudes, and they have to face emotional and psychophysical difficulties as a consequence of living in fatphobic societies. The fear of fat also produces anxieties in thin subjects, especially women, and this seems to involve early bodily interventions and might contribute to eating disorders. So now, in this last part, we're going to explore why I consider fatphobia to be a social work issue. As you know, our profession promotes change, development, empowerment, social cohesion, emancipation of people, social justice, human rights, and also respect for diversity. While certain forms of oppression have been problematized within social work, such as gypsyphobia, transphobia, gender oppression, racism, fatphobia remains an unexplored garden. So we're faced with a lack of social work research exploring the natural structure of oppressions and of fat, and also its intersection with other axes of oppression. So my aim is to promote an anti-oppressive social work and remove the weight stigma, so negative attitudes and stereotypes against fat people are not reproduced. Also, my other aim is to be critical with the obesity epidemic discourse and its neoliberal tone, and also to some of the actions promoted to combat it, because it blames the victims and uses fat people as scapegoats. This generates stigma and prejudices, contributing to their discrimination without taking into account structural issues such as the precarious life of the middle and working classes. In addition, these actions obscure the fact that lifestyle does not have such a negative impact in people's life. However, living under the effects of deprivation and social discrimination does. Social work cannot turn its back into evidence showing fat people are denied jobs, are paid less than thin people, and may find it more difficult to find jobs because their workers or their employers' prejudices. The effects of fatphobia are real and affect negatively people's lives, and the issue of health isn't simply a discourse on governing bodies, but life itself is at risk due to body shape. So now, let's try to recollect some final conclusions. I've exposed how fat has been constructed as an epidemic and to explain why this is a problem for normal weight individuals and also for fat people. The war on obesity discourse rests on the cruel optimism of thinning and on the neoliberal trap of the self-care rhetoric. But this obscures that this generates a multi-million-dollar benefit for the body hate industry. Obesity epidemic discourse also produces narratives of what are the appropriate corporalities for the enjoyment of a good and healthy life, thus contributing to generate stigma and negative stereotypes against fat people, as well as for blaming them for the choices. Fatphobia also produces social discrimination and reduces the chances of living a dignified life for fat people. As social workers, we should denounce this with urgency, giving it visibility in our agendas and trying to not to reproduce in our practice and in the social work classrooms. We must keep in mind that diets are not the answer, and they do not work and cause psychophysical damage to individuals. So if social justice is pursued, we should work on balancing out social asymmetries and stop blaming fat people for the vulnerability they're faced with, and stop projecting in psychology social problems such as fatphobia. Thank you very much. If you have any queries, please contact me at nina.navajas@ub.es. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed this presentation.